Imagine standing at the corner of the Via della Bandanza in Pompeii, just as dawn breaks, on an August morning in 79 AD. Before you see anything clearly, you hear it. The sharp percussion of bronze on iron from a giant blacksmith's forge. The rhythmic grinding of a millstone in a bakery. The scrape of wooden shutters being raised on a thermopolium's counter. These sounds would have defined this city as much as its painted walls or mosaics. Today, Pompeii is silent, a city frozen in volcanic ash. But before Vesuvius erupted, it was something else entirely. A soundscape of 15,000 voices, wheels, hammers, and street cries that we can reconstruct from the stones themselves. Let me show you what this city sounded like before the silence fell. Quick note, this content is based on archaeological evidence, ancient graffiti, preserved architectural remains, and Roman literary sources. Now, consider, what made Pompeii so acoustically intense? This was not a quiet provincial town. 15,000 inhabitants packed into 66 hectares, surrounded by fertile volcanic farmland. A commercial port city where profit mattered more than peace, and numbers tell part of the story. Over 600 shops, bars, and workshops lined streets that were only 5 to 8 meters wide. Most inhabitants lived in multi-story apartment blocks called insulae. These buildings had no kitchens, no private dining spaces, which meant that daily life happened at street level, publicly, loudly. Roman cities were designed for this, for public life, not privacy. Sound was social currency, the noise of commerce, of conversation, of ritual. It seems these weren't nuisances to be eliminated. They were evidence of a functioning urban world. Consider this. While wealthy Romans complained about urban noise in their letters, Pompeians seem to have embraced it. Mercury, the god of commerce, appears on countless shop counters and walls, a city that worshipped the sounds of profit. The poet, Martial, wrote about Rome, but his words likely apply to any Roman city. He said, "I often flee from Rome to my villa to escape the incessant noises of begging clients and hawkers." The Romans were acutely aware of their soundscapes, documented them. They complained about them. They knew exactly what they were hearing. So what were those sounds? Let us examine the evidence. The workshops came first. Archaeologically, we can identify over 30 fulleries in Pompeii. These were cloth processing facilities where workers trod woolen fabric in vats filled with human urine and fullers. Earth. The sound would have been rhythmic, constant, the slap of wet feet on wet cloth, the scrape of wooden beaters. Then the metalwork. Blacksmith forges with bronze hammers striking iron anvils. The tools are still there, preserved in situ. We know the acoustics of this work. The sharp metallic ring that carries for blocks. How it would echo off plastered walls, multiply in narrow streets. The bakeries added their own layer. Rotating millstones powered by donkeys or slaves. The wear patterns on preserved millstones show us exactly how they moved. Heavy volcanic stone grinding against stone, a deep, continuous rumble. The kind of sound you feel in your chest before you consciously hear it. What's remarkable is that Pompeii's architecture amplified sound rather than containing it. Narrow streets with tall facades created acoustic canyons. A single cart's iron-rimmed wheels grinding over basalt would reverberate for entire city blocks. The streets themselves were instruments. Basalt paving stones, uneven, rutted from decades of traffic. Every footstep produced a distinctive scrape and clatter. Every cartwheel added to the percussion. We can still see those ruts today, worn centimeters deep into volcanic rock. And then the vendors. Over 80 thermopolias served, prepared food from street-level counters. These weren't quiet establishments. Street merchants called out their wares. We know this from graffiti, from literary sources. from the social logic of commerce. In a city where most people couldn't read, sound was advertisement. The Roman writer Seneca described living above a bathhouse. Listen to what he heard. According to Seneca, I have lodgings right over a bathing establishment. Picture to yourself the assortment of sounds. The skinny armpit hair plucker with his thin, shrieking voice to attract customers. The splashing of swimmers. The shouts of the sausage dealer and confectioner, each hawking his wares with distinctive cry. Seneca was describing Rome, but Pompeii had multiple bath complexes. The Stabian baths alone could accommodate hundreds. The acoustics were deliberate, vaulted ceilings, hard surfaces, water amplifying every voice. These were social spaces designed for conversation, for display, for the echoing cacophony of communal bathing. We might imagine the ambient layer beneath all this, the animals. Pompeii had donkeys turning millstones, pulling carts, dogs barking, chickens in household courtyards, children playing in the streets, evidenced by gaming boards scratched into paving stones, religious, processions with flutes and drums, shown in preserved frescoes. The specific soundscape would shift with festivals, with seasons, with the time of day, but it was never silent. Roman law restricted cart traffic during daylight hours in major cities, which means that nighttime would have brought a different acoustic profile. The rumble of wooden wheels on stone, the shouts of nighttime deliverymen, the creaking of axles. Evidence suggests that for many Romans, night was louder than day. Now, let me address what you might expect to hear. The popular image shows Pompeii as a serene, archaeological park. Toga-clad philosophers strolling in dignified silence. Gardens, mosaic floors, scholarly contemplation. A frozen moment in time, peaceful and remote. But the evidence suggests something closer to a pre-industrial port city, a place where silence itself would have been suspicious, possibly even threatening, where this absence of sound meant the absence of life. This isn't speculation. Roman writers consistently documented sensory overload in cities. Juvenal, Martial, Seneca all complained about noise-induced insomnia, about the impossibility of concentration, about fleeing to rural villas just to think clearly. Pompeii was an industrial port. It had no noise, ordinances beyond those nighttime cart restrictions, no concept of noise pollution as a regulatory concern. Acoustic. Studies of Roma Ostia, another port city, show similar dense soundscapes in commercial districts. Why does the myth of peaceful antiquity persist? Partly because volcanic preservation created silence. The ash that froze Pompeii in time also silenced it permanently. Modern tourism requires quiet contemplation. Museums, guided tours, the scholarly gaze. These all depend on being able to hear the guide, to think, to reflect. We project pastoral fantasies onto the ancient world, marble temples under blue skies. But we forget the industrial reality, the tanneries, the fullers, the metalwork, the sheer density of human activity compressed into streets barely wide enough for two carts to pass. Consider what was lost in a single afternoon. Pliny the Younger witnessed the eruption from across the bay. He described shrieks of women, wailing of infants, shouting of men as Vesuvius began, then darkness. Then, in his words, a darkness blacker than any ordinary night, and a silence that meant death. The transition from noise to silence must have been absolute, terrifying in its completeness. One moment, a city of 15,000 voices. The next, only the sound of falling ash. What remains today are not the sounds themselves, but the spaces that shaped them. The worn cart ruts, evidence of 10,000 journeys. The countergrooves and thermopolia marble, polished smooth by countless transactions. The acoustic, architecture of bath complexes and forum spaces. Here's the curious irony. Pompeii's silence is precisely what makes it accessible to visitors, what allows us to tour, to photograph, to contemplate. But that silence erases the very essence of Roman urban life. We are drawn to ruins because they are silent, because the absence of original context allows us to project our own meaning onto ancient stones. Every generation sees different things in Pompeii. Romantics saw noble tragedy. Victorians saw moral lessons about vice and divine punishment. We see climate catastrophe, urban planning, the fragility of civilization. But what we cannot see, what we cannot tour or photograph or stand before in contemplation, is the soundscape itself, the layered, relentless, fully human noise that defined this place more completely than any building or artwork. The volcanic ash preserved Pompeii's walls, its frescoes, even the shapes of its citizens in their final moments, voids in the ash that archaeologists filled with plaster to recreate the poses of death. But it could not preserve the one element that likely defined the city most completely. The sound of 15,000 lives lived at full volume, the percussion of hammers on anvils, the grinding of millstones, the calls of street vendors, the splash of water in bathhouses, the rumble of carts, the voices. We visit Pompeii to witness catastrophe, to stand in streets where people died, to see the material culture of Rome preserved as nowhere else on earth. And all of this is valuable. All of this teaches us about the past. But perhaps the greatest loss is the one we cannot tour. The soundscape that fell, silent on a single August afternoon, and has never returned. Every time we stand in those empty streets, we experience the opposite of what Romans experienced. We hear death where they heard life. We find peace where they found chaos. We contemplate in silence what they endured in constant, overwhelming noise. The stones remember nothing, but they testify to cartwheels and footsteps, to commerce and craft, to the dense, textured, fundamentally urban experience of ancient life. And in that testimony, we might hear an echo, not of the sounds themselves, but of what those sounds meant. A city, fully alive, fully present, fully, defiantly loud until the moment it wasn't.